I used to think the worst thing my mother ever did was teach me to be quiet. Not polite quiet. The kind of quiet that looks like maturity at dinner tables and professionalism at work. But inside, it's the sound of every swallowed truth turning to stone. I carried that quiet like a family heirloom. I'm 35 now. A woman who knows how to lace grief into her voice, so it passes for composure. I teach literature at the community college 2 towns over. I drink my coffee black because cream reminds me of the way my mother used to say. Don't sweeten things, just take them as they are. I believed her for so long that I missed the one thing I should have noticed: she never took anything as it was. She rearranged reality until it made her the hero. The story begins on a Sunday that smelled like bleach and lilies. We were at my grandmother's house. No, not house. The house our family's spine. A tall, weathered Victorian with uneven floors and a porch that popped in the summer heat like an old knee. The air was heavy with the particular quiet that follows funerals. Everyone moving a little too carefully. Smiles too thin. Casseroles lined up like apologies. No one wanted to say aloud. My mother floated through her grief like a hostess at a wedding, thanking people for coming, tilting her head just enough to look sincere. My older brother, Viat, did what he always did, stood near the doorway with his hands in his pockets, performing sadness without getting any on himself. All my life, that house had been the one place I felt almost seen. When I was little, my grandmother would set a teacup in front of me and say, "Tell me what the story is today." Mara, as if my life had plot and purpose, as if I weren't just the quiet girl in the corner. I'd tell her about the poems I wrote on gum wrappers and the way I memorized the names of old trees along our street. She'd pat my hand and say, "The world turns for girls like you, even when it pretends not to." She is the only person who ever told me I was the kind of person the world would turn for. She is gone now, and the world, suddenly, felt like a wheel I could not touch. After the guests had gone, after the clatter of dishes and the low hum of family gossip had softened, my grandfather, who had been mostly silent through the day, cleared his throat with the finality of a church bell. He is a careful man, a retired postmaster who never misplaced a letter, who still ties string around boxes as if the right knot could keep history from falling apart. "Before we leave," he said, his voice trembling just enough to remind me he was human, "I should give you your grandmother's instructions." My mother straightened in her chair. Wyatt's hand came out of his pocket. I set my teacup down because I suddenly did not trust my grip. "In the blue tin," he continued, eyes moving between us like a metronome. "On the top shelf of the pantry, there is a letter addressed to Mara." My mother smiled too quickly. "Dad, there's no need to do this now. We're all exhausted." Grandfather shook his head. "Your mother wrote it after her surgery last winter," he said, nodding at me. "She made me promise." I felt the room narrow to a corridor. The pantry door was 5 steps to my left. I know because I counted. My mother rose first. I followed. Wyatt stayed where he was, as if the moment might resolve itself more conveniently if he pretended not to watch. The pantry smelled like flour and old apples. On the top shelf was the blue tin, the one that always held ginger cookies in December. I reached for it, fingertips brushing cold metal, and brought it down, surprised by its weight. My mother stood too close, and her perfume a soft, clean scent that always made me think of rain-soaked laundry. I lifted the lid, inside the letter, and my name on it in my grandmother's cramped, tidy hand, and beneath it, a second envelope, larger, stamped by a lawyer's office in town. My mother's smile dimmed, like a light on a failing dimmer switch. "I should hold on to those," she said lightly. "For safekeeping. Your hands are shaking." "They're fine," I said, and realized they were not. I stepped back into the kitchen, where my grandfather waited with that terrible patience of old men who understand that words are knives. I unfolded the letter. My grandmother's voice rose up at me from the paper. Every sentence, a familiar cadence, I know how you've been made small in this house. I know what has been asked of you, and what has never been given. The house is yours. I didn't understand at first. I read it again. The house is yours. The Victorian with the popping porch. The pantry with the blue tin. The rooms that held our family's noise and history. It was mine. A warmth like shame and gratitude flooded me all at once. I looked at my grandfather, who nodded. Slow and sure. The second envelope contained the will. The lawyer's language was clear: the property at 311 Hawthorne Street to be transferred to my granddaughter, Mara Elise Whitaker, in recognition of her devotion. Care. And my grandmother's hand had noted in the margin because she sees it. I felt something in my chest loosen, as if an old, rusted latch had finally given way. And then I looked at my mother. Her face was a mask, carefully arranged. Only her hands betrayed her. They were so still. My mother is never still. She is always smoothing, wiping, folding, rearranging the world until her reflection in it pleases her. Stillness was her tell. Wyatt took a step toward us, then stopped. A tiny crease appeared between my mother's eyebrows, the way it did when the mail arrived late or the neighbor parked in our spot, or the world had the audacity to fail her in some small, human way. We'll need to review this with Mr. Connolly, she said, naming the family attorney as if he were a kind uncle and not a man who had always done exactly what she wanted. It may not be current. It was updated after her surgery. Grandfather said softly. She checked it twice. She asked me to keep the blue tin where you wouldn't think to look. The room went quiet. Not the simple quiet of an empty room. The charged quiet of a storm coming to the lip of the horizon. I thought of the way my mother had cared for my grandmother through chemo, dutiful, relentless. A martyrdom she wore like jewelry. I thought of the afternoons I sat by the front window with a book, so she wouldn't be alone. And of the way my mother would walk past me as if I were part of the wallpaper. I thought of Wyatt, who was given applause for showing up to carry boxes, while I was given a list of things to do because you're so good at being useful. Mom, I said, very gently. The way you approach a dog that might bite? Did you know? She laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. Don't be absurd, she said. Your grandmother was confused at the end. She was not, Grandfather said. And there it was. The steel edge in his voice I had only ever heard once before, when his brother tried to sell a piece of family land for cash in the late 90s. She was clear. She was also tired of being ignored. We do not raise our voices in my family. We do not slam doors. We simply create new rooms where the tension can breathe until it forgets what it wanted. But in that moment, a door slammed in me. It was private and quiet and sounded like a promise. Wyatt finally spoke. It doesn't make sense, he said, his eyes on the will, but his voice aimed at me. I mean, I've done the most work on the house. You painted your old bedroom last summer, I said, and was shocked at the edge in my tone. Once. He colored, then shrugged in that little boy way he never outgrew. I'm just saying, it's unfair. My mother found her footing again on the polished floor of moral outrage. Exactly, she said, turning to Grandfather. You can't do this to him. He's the one with children. Responsibilities. Mara isn't even married. There it was, the old tally sheet, dug up and slapped on the table. The columns labeled, with value and without. Vet. A father. Vet. A son who mowed the lawn the day before holidays. Vet. A man who knew how to stand with his hands in his pockets and look like he belonged to the future. And me, the daughter who read aloud at night when chemo made my grandmother's eyes too tired. Who fixed the leaky sink because paying someone felt like admitting defeat. Who knew which boards creaked and which didn't, and where the light pooled in afternoon in the little back room where my grandfather took his naps. I do not have a husband. I do not have kids. I have a life that does not fit in their mouth. It's your mother's word, Grandfather said. And her signature. It is what it is. My mother's composure broke like thin ice. It is what it is, she repeated mockingly. And I felt 10 years old again. Eavesdropping from the stairs, while my parents fought about money they didn't have. We'll see what Mr. Time Spy live leg, Connolly says. She swept from the room then. Then her exit a statement I was supposed to admire. Wyatt followed, pausing only to squeeze my shoulder in a gesture that from anyone else might have been tender. From him, it felt like a warning. My grandfather reached across the table and covered my hand with his plaints. His palm was warm, calloused. Heart true. Your grandmother wanted you to have what she could not give you in life, he said. A room you can lock from the inside. I went home that night with a copy of the will and the letter folded into my purse. The weight of them pressing like a pulse. The air outside smelled like rain and cut grass. I drove slowly, as if speed could make me miss it. This fragile feeling of the world rearranging itself toward me. Just a fraction. In my tiny apartment, I spread the documents on the kitchen table and stared at my name. I wanted to feel elation. Instead, I felt afraid. The next morning, Mr. Connolly's assistant called to schedule a meeting. She sounded bright and bland. A voice that has said the same words to 1,000 families. We'll need all beneficiaries present to avoid misunderstandings. I texted my mother. She didn't respond. I called Wyatt. He answered on the second ring. Hey, he said too casually. We're actually thinking it might be best if Mom meets with Connolly alone first. You know, to get a sense of things. It's my meeting, I said. It's my name. A pause. Then a sigh. I'm trying to keep things from getting ugly. They're already ugly. He didn't argue. He hung up. At the law office. 3 days later. My mother was already in the conference room when I arrived. She had chosen the chair at the head of the table and placed her handbag beside it as if to mark territory. Mr. Connolly came in with a folder and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He had always liked my mother. Which is to say, he enjoyed the way she made decisions for other people and pretended they had been theirs. He began with condolences. We nodded like people agreeing to a truce. Then he opened the folder and pulled out an extra piece of paper. There is one complication, he said, and my stomach dropped hard enough to make me dizzy. My grandmother's signature was there, and the date, but the paragraph above it was new. A codicil, he called it. 3 sentences. The house to Mara. The other assets, savings, bonds. The small life insurance split equally between the grandchildren. That part was fine. It was the sentence after that stopped me. Executor Caroline Whitaker. My mother. That was always the plan. My mother said smoothly. I've managed her affairs for years. I looked at Mr. Prieson. Connolly. He did not look at me. The codicil was filed 2 months ago. He said, it does not change the main bequest. I'd like a copy. I said, and he nodded as if I'd asked for a glass of water. When we stood to leave, my mother leaned close, voice low enough to pass for intimacy. You don't understand what this house costs, she said. The taxes, the repairs, the neighborhood changing. You think it's a storybook? It's a money pit. You don't want me to have it, I said. It wasn't a question. She smiled. It was the saddest expression I've ever seen on a human face. I don't want you to leave me behind. The truth landed with a clarity that felt like cruelty. She didn't want the house. She wanted the power to decide what it meant. Maybe she always had. That night, I found the first crack. The property tax record showed a payment made last year from a joint account that shouldn't have existed. My grandmother's name and my mother's. I thought again of the blue tin. Of the way my grandmother chose paper and pantry and a promise to a husband she trusted, to be honest. I thought of what my mother had said about managing things. I pulled up public records and looked back further. 2 years ago. A small home equity line. Nothing dramatic. But the signature. It was my grandmother's name in a hand that looked almost right. Almost. Fear rose in me like a tide. I called my grandfather. It went to voicemail. I printed the records before my courage could drain away. There. In black and white. In the unromantic typeface of municipal truth. It was the beginning of a different story. My grandmother's house was mine in the will. But someone had already begun to spend it out from under her. The quiet I had swallowed my whole life suddenly burned in my throat. I drank water. It tasted like tin. I looked at the ceiling and imagined it crashing down, not on me, but around me, leaving me standing in a ruin I could claim with both hands. In the morning, I called a woman named Hattie Davenport. A lawyer, a colleague of mine had used for a nightmare of a probate. Her voice, when she answered, was steady and amused, like someone who has stopped being shocked by people and therefore knows how to protect you from them. I told her everything. The blue tin, the codicil, the line of credit that wasn't, my mother's sudden stillness, a predator's patience. Hattie listened without interrupting. Okay, she said finally. First, breathe. Second, we'll subpoena the bank for signatures on all lines of credit. And we'll request handwriting analysis. Third, don't confront your mother yet. Paper is your friend. I don't want to destroy her, I said, and surprised myself with how true it was. I just want the truth to exist in a room where she can't control the lighting. That's a beautiful sentence, Hattie said, and a fair goal. But truth doesn't walk into rooms politely. Sometimes you have to drag it in by the hair. Are you ready for that? I didn't answer right away. In the window, the morning was pale and undecided. Somewhere above my building, a bird kept insisting on its own small joy. I thought of my grandmother's marginal notes. The way she wrote in the will because legal language wasn't enough to hold what she meant. Because she sees it was the only proof the world respects when a woman leaves something to another woman. Yes, I said finally. I'm ready. And the quiet in me, that old heirloom, cracked so loudly I could hear it. ChatGPT said. The next morning came with the smell of rain again. The kind of rain that hides the sky, but doesn't touch the ground yet, waiting. Deciding, I sat at my small kitchen table, the document spread out like a map of someone else's life. Coffee cooling beside them. I'd thought the will was the final word. The last chapter in my grandmother's careful, loving story. Now it felt like the beginning of a new one. Written in invisible ink. Hattie called before 8. I've already spoken to the clerk, she said. The line of credit was opened 6 months before your grandmother's first surgery. We're pulling the handwriting sample now. Don't panic if you hear nothing for a few days. Paper trails are patient creatures. Her steadiness calmed me more than I expected. After we hung up, I dressed for work automatically. Black slacks, white blouse, hair pulled back. The world goes on, even when you're cracking open your family's secrets. My students didn't know anything had changed. They asked about poems, midterms, meaning, and I taught them like nothing was wrong, because I've always known how to do that. But when the last student left, I stayed in the empty classroom. The rain had started. It drummed against the windows, soft and relentless, like someone knocking to be let in. I took out my phone and looked at the picture of the house I'd taken years ago, the porch sagging, the magnolia tree still blooming despite the neglect. I thought of my grandmother sitting there with a blanket over her knees, whispering, "You see it, don't you?" I did see it, the beauty and the rot living side by side. I always had. That night, a text from my brother Mom says you're making trouble again. I didn't answer. The next one came an hour later. She's upset. Maybe stop digging. I almost laughed. He was still protecting her. Or maybe protecting himself. It was hard to tell anymore. 2 days later, Hattie called again. We have the handwriting analysis. The signature on the equity line isn't your grandmother's. It's a simulation traced from an old document, and the notary stamp forged. The words felt both heavy and hollow. So she did it, I said quietly. She did. Hetty said. But listen, don't go to her. We'll file first. Let her respond to paper. Not to you. That night I dreamed of the house flooding water rising past the windows, my mother standing in it, smiling as if she didn't notice the water around her knees. I woke up sweating, heart hammering. I tried to follow Hattie's advice. But by Sunday, my resolve broke. I drove to my grandfather's place. The porch light was on, though it was barely afternoon. He opened the door before I could knock twice. I know, he said softly. She's been calling me all week. I stepped inside. The air smelled of pipe, tobacco, and dust. A smell that had always meant safety. He led me to the kitchen and poured coffee, his hands shaking just enough to make the spoon rattle. She said, "You're ruining everything," he said. I told her she ruined it first. I sat down slowly. She forged it. "Granddad, we have proof." He nodded. "I know. I found her burning old bills yesterday. She's scared." Something in me faltered at that. Scared. I'd imagined her angry, manipulative, proud but scared. That word made her human again. "She'll come to you," he said quietly. "Soon." He was right. She came 2 days later. No warning. No text. Just the sharp knock of someone who still believes every door will open for her. I opened it anyway. She looked smaller. Her hair wasn't perfect. Her eyes red-rimmed. "Mara," she said, and her voice cracked on my name. "We need to talk." I stepped aside. She walked into my apartment like she still owned every room she entered. But then she stopped, turned, and I saw fear flicker across her face. "You found it," she said. "The loan." I didn't answer. She laughed once, a sound with no joy in it. "You think I stole from her? From you?" "You did," I said. My voice was low, calm. "Why?" She sat down at the table, clutching her purse like it might protect her. "Because she wouldn't stop giving everything to everyone else," she said. "Bitter. Your father. Your brother. You. I took care of her. I bathed her. Fed her. Cleaned up after her. And she wrote you into her will like I was the hired help. Do you know what it feels like to be erased in your own mother's story?" Her words hit me like stones. I could almost see the young woman she used to be eager to please, desperate to matter. I had inherited more from her than I wanted to admit. "I didn't mean to steal," she said finally. "I meant to survive." "You had choices," I whispered. "You could have asked me. You could have trusted me." She looked up then, and the mask slipped entirely. "I didn't think you'd say yes," she said. "I didn't think you'd help me." That broke something open in both of us. I wanted to shout, to demand she see me. But the anger melted into something softer and more dangerous grief. Grief for the years wasted, pretending love was obedience. "I filed a case," I said finally. "I can't undo that." She nodded. "I know." We sat there in silence for a long time. The rain started again, tapping at the window like an audience we couldn't see. When she stood to leave, she paused in the doorway. "Your grandmother always said you see things clearly," she said. "Maybe you can see a way to forgive me one day." After she left, I stood in the middle of the room and let the silence expand until it hurt. Then I called Hattie. "She came," I said. "Did she admit it?" "Not the way you mean. But yes." Hattie was quiet for a moment. "Do you still want to go through with it?" I looked at the empty chair where my mother had sat, the faint shape her presence had left in the air. "Yes," I said, "because she can't keep rewriting the story to make herself the victim." When the court date came, it was raining again. I sat behind Hattie, hands folded in my lap, watching my mother at the other table. She looked tired, fragile in a way that might have been real or rehearsed. When the judge read the findings, the forgery confirmed. The property line reversed. The restitution ordered. My mother didn't look at me. She stared at the floor. Wyatt wasn't there. Afterward, outside, the rain finally stopped. The world smelled washed clean. Hetty touched my arm. "You okay?" "I think so," I said. "It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like ending." She smiled gently. "That's what justice feels like most of the time." That night I drove back to Hawthorne Street. The porch light was out. The magnolia tree bare now. I stood there with the keys in my hand. The house dark and waiting. I didn't open the door. Not yet. I just stood and listened to the wind, to the ghost of my grandmother's voice, to the sound of my own breath, finally steady in my chest. Somewhere inside me, the old quiet settled into something new, not fear, not obedience. Peace, the kind you build yourself. I unlocked the door to the house the next morning. The key turned stiffly, the way it always had when the weather changed. The smell that met me was exactly as I remembered wood polish. Old paper. A faint trace of lavender from the sachets my grandmother used to hide in drawers. I stepped inside and stood in the front hall for a long time. Just breathing. It felt strange to be there without anyone else. All the years of noise, of family chatter and laughter and tension, had faded into a stillness so deep it almost hummed. The sunlight reached through the lace curtains in long, trembling lines, touching the floorboards where I had once sat as a child, listening to my mother and grandmother argue in the next room. I walked slowly through each room, the kitchen first unchanged except for the empty space on the shelf where the blue tin used to sit. Then the dining room, the long table where I had spent every Thanksgiving trying to disappear between other people's stories, the parlor with its sagging couch, the staircase that creaked in protest when I put my foot on the first step. When I reached my grandmother's room, I paused at the doorway. The bed was neatly made. The quilt folded at the foot like she'd only stepped out for a moment. Her reading glasses still rested on the nightstand beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. I sat on the edge of the bed and ran my hand over the quilt. It was one she'd sewn the year I left for college, scraps of old curtains and shirts. "Colors soft and worn," she'd said. "It's not about matching. It's about mending." The words came back to me now, clearer than ever. On the dresser sat a framed photo of her and my mother, both smiling, arms around each other. It was taken before everything turned bitter. I picked it up and stared at their faces. My mother looked young, almost shy. My grandmother's eyes, though, I had that same quiet knowing I'd always recognized. She had probably seen the seeds of what would grow between them, the resentment, the misunderstanding, but had loved them both anyway. I thought about what my mother had said, about being erased. I could almost understand it now. She'd spent her life fighting for a kind of acknowledgement that never came, even from her own mother. I'd spent mine fighting not to disappear entirely. Maybe we were two sides of the same wound. In the corner of the room was the old cedar chest. I knelt in front of it and opened the lid. Inside were the things my grandmother had chosen to keep letters tied with ribbon. Photographs, scraps of fabric, an old tin of buttons, and near the bottom, another envelope, yellowed with age. My name written on it in that same careful hand. My throat tightened as I opened it. "Mara, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I didn't want you to find out about the house this way. But I knew there would be no peace if I didn't make my choice clear. You are the only one who ever listened to what wasn't being said. Take care of this place. Not because of what it's worth, but because you understand what it holds. Do not let bitterness take root here. It has enough ghosts already. Remember that forgiveness doesn't mean you have to let anyone back in. It just means you've stopped letting them live rent-free in your heart." I pressed the paper to my chest. Tears came quietly this time. Not from pain, but from relief. She had known exactly what would happen. She had trusted me to survive it. I stayed there for a long while, then stood and opened the curtains. The morning light poured in, golden and soft. Dust motes danced like tiny souls in the air. I whispered, "I'll take care of it. Grandma, I promise." Over the next few months, I came back every weekend. I cleaned, repaired, and painted. I replaced broken tiles, patched leaks, planted marigolds in the garden. Each task felt like a conversation with her, gentle, wordless, healing. Sometimes neighbors stopped by to talk. They asked about the house, about the family. I told them it was mine now. Saying those words out loud still felt unreal. One afternoon, while sanding the porch railing, a car pulled up. It was Wyatt. He got out slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes wary. "Mom's been quiet," he said by way of greeting. "You heard from her?" "No," I said. He nodded. "She's not doing great. I think she misses you." I leaned on the railing. "Does she miss me? Or does she miss winning?" He sighed. "Maybe both." Then he looked up at the house. "It looks good. Better than it has in years." I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, "Thanks." After a long silence, he said, "I didn't know what she did. I swear I didn't." I believed him. Wyatt was many things selfish. Inattentive but not cruel. "I know," I said. He kicked at the gravel. "She told me once that Grandma always loved you best." "That's not true," I said. "She just knew how to see people." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe that's what Mom never learned." We stood there for a moment longer, the unspoken words thick between us. Then he said, "You'll let me bring the kids by sometime?" "Of course," I said, and I meant it. After he left, I sat on the porch steps and watched the sunset spill gold across the yard. The magnolia tree rustled. A soft applause. The house, for the first time in years, felt alive again. That night, I lit one of my grandmother's old oil lamps and walked through each room. I thought of all the generations that had passed through these walls, their arguments, their laughter, their small mercies. I thought of my mother, somewhere in her quiet apartment, perhaps replaying every choice she'd made. I hoped she would find peace, even if it wasn't with me. As I locked the door, I whispered, "We're done with the silence." When I drove away, the porch light flicked on behind me, set on a timer. A small pulse of light in the dark. It looked, for just a moment, like a heartbeat. If you've ever carried the weight of a family secret, if you've ever had to choose truth over belonging, then you understand what this story means. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step out of the story someone else wrote for you and begin your own.